All right, hello and welcome to the video lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be solving the post request challenge. And here we're going to be making an HTTP post request. And this is going to be the second HTTP request type that we've seen after the GET request, which we saw in the original challenge a couple challenges ago. And the post request is basically a common way to send data to a server. So typically, this usually corresponds to an operation where you are basically creating some new resource. So for example, we give this scenario here, where you can imagine that you're using a chat application and you send someone a message. It's likely that that will require sending an HTTP post request to some backend server, and that server is going to receive the post request and then create a new message which corresponds to the message data that you have sent. And so we have a few new things here. The key thing that's new is that we're going to be actually sending data to a server. And so that's really what this challenge is all about. So we have our example here where we're still using the fetch API and we pass in some URL path. And then we have to supply this second argument, which is some additional options to describe our request. And so we can supply the HTTP method to use, some additional headers, and then of course the body, which is the actual data that we want to send in the request. And of course we are converting this to JSON. And so the method is pretty straightforward. We want to just tell it to use a get method, a post method, a put method, a patch method, whatever method we want to use. The headers are another piece which is slightly new, and you can read about headers more on this page if you are curious, but they basically allow you to send additional information with HTTP requests and responses. So these can contain various pieces of information, such as for us here, the type of content that we are sending, which is of course application/JSON. But they can contain other information as well, such as authentication information or caching information and various things like this. So the headers are pretty important, but you may not find yourself using them too frequently. All right, and so with that, let's go ahead and dive into the actual challenge here. So we want to be completing this post request function. Of course, let's start out with a try catch, and we can just return an error occurred for any errors. And then we want to, let's go ahead and just grab this example code from here. Put this here, and I'm going to pull out this options like this. Options equals all of this, and the options type is this request. Request init. Feel free to look into that more if you are curious. And our URL, of course, is this URL here, like that, with a /API. So this is the same URL that we used before in the GET request, but here we are going to be making a post request to this URL. And so we can take a look at our server again. So if we come back here and we grab the link to the server, let's go ahead and get back in our challenge. And if we take a look at the server code, we will see that we have this app.get/API, and then we have this app.post/API. So depending on the type of HTTP request, a different one of these handlers will be called. So we have post here, then we have put, and then we have delete. So even though these are all at the same resource path or resource route, the type of HTTP request will result in different code being called. And we can see for the post request that we are pulling the body out of the request object here, and then we're just sending the body back in the response as part of this request body. And that's really just to kind of demonstrate what we're doing here. This doesn't do anything else. This doesn't do anything fancy. Nothing is really being created. There's no database involved, and that's perfectly okay. This is just an example server that we're using for the purposes of these challenges. But it does give you this idea about having different routes and then handling them depending on the type of HTTP request which is received. All right, so we have our URL. Let's go ahead and pass this in here. And then of course, we are going to be sending the JSON data for whatever data is passed into this function. So this function basically lets you pass in data, and then that's going to be sent to the server in this HTTP request. So we want to say result equals await, calling fetch like that. And then our actual, let's call this response. Our actual result is going to be await. And then we want to have response.json. We want to actually call the .json method on our response. And then we're going to return that result. All right, let's go ahead and run the tests. And we'll see that this passes the tests. All right, so just to demonstrate more what exactly this is doing, let's go ahead and log out this result. And then I'm going to call my post request method with the string hello, and we can run that, and we still pass, and we can see that we get this message over here, which is this object where we have got a post request at /API, and our request body is an object. Let's take a look inside, and the object is data hello. All right, and that is exactly what we are sending here, which is then being captured in our server right here in the body, and then of course that is getting returned back to us in the request body. And if you're wondering where this data key is coming from, it is coming from right here, because we are just kind of using an object literal, or I forget the exact term for this, but we are just adding in this key data, which basically results in this here. That was just a shorthand property for doing this. So we are basically assigning this data, whatever it is, to a data key in our object, and that is where we are getting this here. If we didn't do that and we just passed in the data directly like that, I think actually that will be invalid JSON, and so that is not going to work. So we will have to in fact do it like this. All right, so that is going to wrap it up for the post request challenge, and with that we will see you in the next challenge.